Hi, I'm Glenn and welcome to my next project. In this episode, part 2, I'm going to show you how I stripped down my cabinet door and drawer fronts to bare wood to expose the oak grain, how I filled the grain, and then painted it. I made several mistakes along the way, but you can come along and learn with me and find out what really works.
First thing I'm going to do is remove all the paint from the door and drawer fronts.
This was my test. This is what I did a week or so ago to make sure this chemical stripper was going to work for me, and also to help me decide whether I wanted to sand or strip. So this is the stripper I'll be using. It worked quite fine, though it's also quite caustic, so I'll be using my gas mask with brand new filters. I will be using the chipping brush to apply, and the scraper, and I have another brush over here too if I need a little bit more of a stiff brush in these grooves. And this is really the main reason why I'm using a stripper rather than sanding it. I would just use like a 220 grit sandpaper and smooth this out, but I wouldn't be able to do that in these rounded areas. And I just like starting from fresh anyways. Whew! Still stinks in here. Anyways, I just finished. Oh, don't do that. It tastes bad. I'm going to make this short because I want to put this thing back on. I need to clean up. There's all kinds of, it looks like wet toilet paper, but it's, you know, paint, and it still has the stripper on it. And that's probably contributing a lot to the smell, is just it all sitting right there. So I've got to clean all that up. And then what I'm going to do is sand. So I got off most of the paint, and from my experience sanding, what is left over is not hard to remove. And what I really wanted to focus on was getting in those little grooves, tight little corners, the rounded edges, and the tiny little, you know, it's like a little 90-degree crevice that is super hard to get to and painstaking, and I have to go through it with tiny little tools like the corner of this or various fittings on my Dremel. I've got a soft, it's kind of like a wool brush, not a wire brush. So it removes the paint, but it wears down really quickly. It works great, but I go through them quickly.
I want to try this magic trick I learned on YouTube. I'm going to clean up this mess. Okay. Alakazam, abracadoo, this mess is going to be gone by 2. All right, it worked.
And I wanted to go over my system. So when I first started, I had what I thought was an efficient system. So I had these 4 sawhorses with the 2x3s on them, and what I found was it was easier to have a workstation. So for sanding, I have my vacuum cleaner set up over here with the hose dangling, so it suspends, and it's a lot easier to move around that way. And I found it a lot easier just to sand in this one location. So have a stack that needs to be sand it, and then have a stack that's done. I also had the same idea originally of using the stripper. I thought I would apply, and then strip. But it turned out I could only really strip 2 or 3. You know, when they're this size, 2 is really all you can do at once, because I would apply it to 2 of them, and by the time I was done applying, I had to wait maybe 3 or 4 minutes for the first one to start. You saw it, it sort of expands but shrinks, get this rumply look. Now the problem is the second one, so I start scraping on that, and then the second one starts to dry, and then it re-adheres. So you really have to hit the paint while the paint stripper is gooey. What I found works best for the stripping is, once again, have a station. And I found I was working here underneath my infrared light because that kept the surface warmer, because it's like 60 degrees in here, but the chemicals work better at a little warmer temperature. So I was working here and here, and same thing, I had my staging area, need to do, and then done. And I just kind of moved it about as I needed to, and that worked really well. So right now I'm going to use a combination of this little sander with the triangle to get in the corners, my bigger palm rotary, random orbital rotary sander. By the way, this is a really good sander. I've had no problems, and I have really used it. I have had to replace, and I'll probably have to do it again too. Oh, so this is hook and loop. There's a hook and loop pad underneath, and that one will wear out when you get into the sides. So if you see this one, look closely, it's sort of abraded or worn down on the sides, and it gets to a point where the hooks are gone and it won't stick to the sandpaper, and then the sandpaper like flips off this way. So you can buy these, and actually they tend to come with the packs, these sanding discs. And these sanding discs I like. I've been using those quite a bit. I went back and forth with sand paper discs, but these are sand net. Yes, sand net. And this is the little thing that it comes with it, and I do recommend using it because it'll extend the life of the original. You can buy these, and I think I paid $17 or $18 for it. So use these to protect it so you don't have to do that. All right, so my strategy now is to have my little sanding station here. I'm going to use my Dremel with this soft brush to get the rounded edges. I'm going to use my triangular vibrating sander. It works all right. For the straight edges, the corners, I will use my random orbital sander for the big flat surfaces. And I will almost certainly use my wire brush that is thoroughly worn down. And then I think I'll probably also use this. Oh, and sandpaper on my fingers to do that. I'm really excited. So I don't know if I'm halfway through this project or not, but I'm greatly into it. And about half of the doors and drawer fronts. Now, I didn't get all of it yet, and I pretty much only did one side on most of them. And then I start thinking, as I'm doing this and as the labor's getting intensive and kind of boring, I'm thinking to myself, do I really need to do this? And then of course my internal voice is, oh, that's just you trying to cop out of work. You know, don't do a cheap job. And that was my intent from the first place. I wanted to do a really good job, and I've seen when people, even including myself, just paint over something that's already been painted, it generally looks like it. It looks thick, it looks heavy. Sometimes there's, you know, little marks of the texture under it, like anywhere the paint has chipped off, and then you see that. And I did not want that. I wanted this to look like a brand new professional job. Now, as I sanded the paint off of the cabinet fronts, I found that I still had the texture of the oak, and it was smoother than this, but still not totally smooth, not like glass, which is really what I want. And then as I took the paint off of this, I realized that, well, I can feel the texture even more. So maybe I shouldn't be removing the paint. Maybe I should just sand over it with a 120 or 220 sandpaper, make it smooth. My guess is that the bare wood is going to take 1 or 2 extra coats of primer than the painted stuff. So kind of kicking myself for not taking that approach in the first place, but that is exactly why I'm doing these videos, so you can learn from my mistakes. Scraping paint and sanding paint is incredibly labor intensive, and it can be fun. I mean, you listen to a book, you You put on some music, whatever, just get into it, and you know, it's okay. But I would rather paint it and finish it and move on. But I want it to look good. My fear was that I would finish it and then it would still look crappy, and then I'd feel like it was all a waste. So I figured it was more important to spend more time at the beginning in prepping and getting it just right, so I know that the finished product is as good as it can be.
So the bristles on the brush get in there much better than the roller does. The roller mostly covers it like a roof. I want it to fill it like water in a vessel.
Once it's all applied with the brush, I'll go over it with a roller to smooth it, which makes sanding a lot better.
The main reason I'm using this thicker primer, this high build primer, is because of the wood grain. Now this is oak, and what I can feel here is kind of little grooves and channels or low spots, in other words. And so I want the primer to fill that. So I lay it on and then sand it off, which is freaking my wife out. She's like, why do you keep sanding it off if you just put it on? Why not leave it on? Because what's important is what I don't sand off, and that's what's filling the crevices. And though after sanding it once, it still has some, put another coat on and sand it, and another coat on and sand it until you have it smooth as glass, which is what I'm going for. Now, in an attempt to find ways to fill those little crevices without having to apply 3 or 4 coats of primer, I thought, I wonder if epoxy would work. And so this is what epoxy looks like. Let me see if there we go. You can see how it's not an even finish. It's kind of like oil on water. And I'm sure somebody could tell me why it does this, why it did this. And now here, it actually did what I wanted because it went in. So I think once I sand off the top layer, what I will be left with is the epoxy in here. So it might turn out pretty well, but I think it's also going to be a lot of sanding. So I don't believe I'm going to go that route. And so what I found, and I've said this before, I keep trying other rollers, but what I have here is a 1/8 inch, there we go, a 1/8 inch nap foam roller. It's just a sleeve with a little bit of foam rubber, right? Yeah, like padding. This works great. It works for epoxy, it works for that really thick primer I'm using, and it works for really thin paint. I mean, too bad they're so hard to get. I think I'm going to put a link in the description of where I got these, because I love them. Whenever I start a project, there's many different ways that I can do it, and so I have to experiment, try this, try that. I, of course, do what I think will work first, and sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So, for example, I have these sawhorses, plastic sawhorses that have a slot in the plastic at the top, and you can stick, it's 1.5 inches wide, so you can stick a 2x4 in there or whatever. I happen to have some 2x3s on hand, so I just plop those in and they work great, but I'm 6'1", so I have to bend down a little bit lower than is optimally comfortable. So I would rather put 2x4s or maybe 2x6s. That might be too high, but it's something to think about that you might not think about ahead of time, because this takes a lot of sanding. I have spent so much time sanding and I have so much more to go. You might as well make it as ergonomically comfortable as possible. And that's also what this is. I found that the hose was catching on the doors, and not only was it offering resistance as I'm pulling this way, but at some point, once I have some paint on here, a nice layer, I don't want this scratching it or scraping it off. So I found that I hung it here, and I really didn't need to get around the whole garage. In fact, it's a lot easier just to stand in one place and move the doors from one side to the other. I started using an air hose just now, and that works to get the dust out of here. So when I'm sanding, I wear one glove on this hand because I think I was getting a blister. So I have one glove on this hand, and then after I sand a while, I'll feel it with my left hand. And when there's grit on it, it's hard to tell whether you're feeling grit or kind of dipples in the paint or in the surface. So that's what works for me. And of course, the plastic sheeting I have here, I just tied it on a string. Actually, I tied a string from that end of the garage to that end of the garage on both sides, and I looped the plastic over and put tape on it. So it's kind of like a shower curtain now. So when I'm not sanding or spray painting, I can move it all to one area and kind of stuff it in a box on that shelf. That works pretty well. All right, now I'm in the painting phase. I have a coat of primer, one coat of primer on one side of every one of the doors. I did a little test, and I painted 2 coats on, and then I came by after it was dry and I sanded, and there really wasn't a difference sanding 1 coat versus sanding 2. So I'm going to go ahead and lay a second coat on everything before I sand. Now, just to refresh your memory, what I am doing here, the main objective and the reason I'm going to use multiple coats of primer is to fill in the wood grain. I don't want the wood grain showing. I don't think I'm going to pay so much attention to the back side of the door. So once you open the doors, if you see wood grain in there, I don't really see that as a problem. But I do want the fronts to look smooth, as if it's not wood grain. I want it to look like plastic, I guess, which is, I know, kind of sad considering it's such beautiful oak. But hey, oak's not in fashion now, so we got to keep with the times. Most importantly, this is what my wife wants. So happy wife, happy life. I know that. Anyways, I've set up my Monsters Inc. door factory here, or door warehouse. And the system that I've been doing is I put on the coat here, and then I grab onto these little hooks that I've screwed into the bottom or the opposite side. So for the lower doors, I've put the hooks in the bottom. For the higher doors, I've put the hooks in the top. So these will not really be seen ever once they're installed. And there's just going to be 2 little holes. So anyways, I put the coat on there and put it up here to dry. I have 2 infrared lamps, and I have a fan, and so those go on them after it's all dry, and I have some area here to lay it out if I need. And what I was trying to see if it made a difference was, after I roll on the primer, I set the door down over here so it can settle down horizontally rather than dripping, because if it's still a little bit thick, if there's any thick spots, you'll get some runs or some sags. So I don't want that. So I am using this table a little bit, but as you see, I don't have the other one because I don't need the other one. So I just removed it. Just one process after another, one phase after another. So one more thing I wanted to show you. I bought some little dots, itty bitty little dots. They're 1/4 inch, and they are used to stick where the screw holes go for the cabinet hardware, for the door hardware. I didn't fill up the big hole because that's not really a big deal. I just made sure I didn't goop any paint in there, but you can see the little dot there and there. And these are $1.29. I'm not going to use them all. There's 480 of them. I'm not going to use them all, but that's okay.
Here you see a close-up of what I'm dealing with, those crevices in the wood that I'm working on filling, using everything I can to get in those crevices and stay. The green is the thickened epoxy, the white is either paint or primer. This is Aqua Coat. I'm rubbing in with my finger, trying to get it worked into those crevices. The Aqua Coat was probably the easiest thing to work with, but it shrunk so much when it dried that I had to go over it multiple times. I tried everything I could think of, epoxy, and even mixing things together like the shrink-free Spackling and the Aqua Coat, which came up with a really thick slurry. This too was really easy to work with, easy to apply, easy to sand off, but I don't think it did a better job than Aqua Coat alone. Probably about the same. It's worth a try.
Oh, hi. This is a bad choice for a sanding block because it's black. And I have to be very careful not to touch the sides or else it leaves a little black spot. And it sands out pretty easily or wipes out, but then that's one more thing I have to do. Oh, you know, I suppose I could put some tape over that. That's a good idea, Glenn. Glad I thought of it. That was a brilliant idea, and you know what? I gotta hand it to you. I really feel like this came from you guys because I was telling you how this is marking that up, and then I was thinking somebody's gonna comment on that after they see the video. Well, I haven't posted this yet because you're now watching it, but because I'm filming it. But I was thinking, well, what would somebody say? They would say, put some tape on it so it doesn't make contact, so the black itself doesn't make contact. So there we go. Thank you. I also tied a leash to my vacuum hose, and then I tied the other end of the leash to my bench. Now, that started with me trying to hang this on a bungee cord or some sort of thing that would allow me to pull it down, vacuum, and then release it, and it would go back up out of the way. But I wasn't able to figure out how to do that very quickly and easily, and I don't want to take away from my sanding, my precious sanding time. So I just tied this on it and tied it to there, and all I have to do to grab it is reach down here and pull up. So it just saves me about a second here and there and a number of bending over. You know, when you have a bad back, you really need to batch your bend overs because I don't want to be doing it 100 times if I could get by with doing it 20 times. I bought a small vacuum cleaner hose at one of the box stores, and I cut off the end because it had a particular fitting on it, and then I cut 2 cuts longwise into the hose so it would sply out a bit. So I put it over the end here, and then I have 2 hose clamps because I didn't have one that was the right size, so I used 2 hose clamps. That's the only reason. This is held on and it swivels a little bit. I put it on really tight, and I put the tape around it to keep the ends of the hose clamps from marking up and gouging out my work. I always use the vacuum on with this because it really makes a big difference, and it gets the dust out of here and leaves almost nothing on the surface that I'm grinding, sanding. All right, now it's time for the fine tuning. I'm doing a little bit different process now. Instead of doing just one thing on every one of them and then circling them through, for example, sanding every one and then cleaning every one and then applying something to every one, I'm doing everything to each one before I hang it up and call it ready. So what I'm doing now is my process is I first start off with the Scotch-Brite, and I go over every surface to knock off any high points and to also scuff it up a little bit. Then I inspect it really, really closely, and I look to see what needs to be done where. So I have a variety of tools that I'm using for this. So for one, after the Scotch-Brite, then I'll inspect and I'll see what's needed. So if it's a rounded, a soft area, I'll use the soft sanding. If it's a big area like this, I will use my sanding block so I can get a nice smooth finish. If it's along this edge here, I would use, so this is a little bit of molding that I had, and I just wrap some sandpaper on it, and what that does is it's a straight flat finish, but it doesn't curve at all. For example, the sponge is a flat finish, but it will curve and contour, and I don't really want the contours at this point if I can help it. I want everything to be smooth and flat as I can. So I just go through here and I can generally feel what needs it. So whether I feel it with this or feel it with my hand afterwards, I can tell what needs what and how much. But that's also why I like hand sanding, because I can feel every little dip or change in the texture. And then I can go through and feel it with my bare hand to see if there's something I can do about it. After I do all of the sanding, and I'm inspecting the whole time, so I am looking and feeling every square inch of this door. Incidentally, I'm only doing the front and the sides. I'm not doing that on the back. The back, I don't know if you can see, but there's quite a bit of wood grain going through. I didn't use any filler on this. There's 1 or 2 coats of primer and 1 coat of paint on the back, and that's fine. I think it'll be acceptable once it's in use. So after I do all the sanding, if there's anything that needs filling, like you can, there's a little goop right there. I'm going to have to sand that a little bit more, and then there's some wood grain showing right there. So I'll have to put a little bit of the Aqua Coat. So when I put the Aqua Coat on, I like to rub it in any of these problem areas that I'm still working on. So this is what, the 4th time I've worked on this spot, maybe 3rd, but I want to rub it in all directions so it gets in the grooves, and then when I sand it off the top, hopefully it won't come out. So I don't know whether the problem is the Aqua Coat is coming out when I sand, because it is, or if it's simply not going in the holes, the crevices at all. Maybe it's just bridging over the top. So since I don't really know that, I find that working it in like this does a pretty good job, and then going over it lightly with the either sandpaper or the Scotch-Brite. Hi, I just want to give a little update on my latest painting. I had, as you know, I sanded everything again after it had been painted with 2 coats of paint and 1 coat of primer, not necessarily in that order. And I was hoping I would be done with just 1 more quick spray to cover up any spots that were a little bit thin. And let me show you, there is some thin areas here, and we can see it's a little bit dark all along here. So that definitely needs more paint. But there's some areas that trouble me, like this little splotch right there. I think it's just a glob of dried paint that was on the tip. We can see some sanding scratches through there. There's little freckles and speckles, and there's some runs. So the Wagner painting, this is the Wagner Flexio 3000. It works okay. I would say it's worth its money, but it's really beyond its ability to paint such a fine surface like this, which is too bad. Hey guys, I am so excited. I'm busting at the seams. I feel like a kid on Christmas morning. I've got something new that's going to make this whole job so much better. Let me just show you. Come on. It's beautiful. I can't believe it. All right, let's see what we got. Well, this is a paint sprayer, and this is the hose. And you know what's really neat about it? There's no paint on it. Brand new. I'm very excited because I think this is going to make my painting so much easier. Not just easier, I think easy is not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for good quality. Don't know what that is, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. This is the puppy. So this is the Graco. Anyways, I don't know. I've never used one of these, so I'm going to see if I like it. But I have a really strong feeling that it's going to be better than that Wagner I was using, and then I'm not going to have to sand off all the paint that I sprayed on with all the splatters and whatnot. So let's hope this works. I will keep you abreast as I begin using it. So I have my little painting booth set up, and here's the nice spray nozzle. Paint comes out this end. Notice there's no paint on it. It's beautiful. It'll never look like this again. And I've set up a couple of fans there with filters and there to catch any of the leftover paint that's in the air. So I'm getting ready to put on my last coat or two. I expect to need 2 coats. Even if this next coat I put on turns out perfectly, I'm going to put on another coat just to make sure there's some thickness in the paint so it's not going to wear off or chip off and show through very easily. All right, this is my test piece before I paint an actual door that matters. I'm going to paint this, the back of a bulletin board. It's basically cardboard, so it doesn't really matter, but you want it to have a similar texture to what you're going to paint. So I think once again I'll start the spray when I'm off the thing. It's not a good idea to aim it at the thing you want and then hit the spray, because that's, look, you can see paint right in there. So that's why it dribbles out, because it gets that first pressure and it blows some big chunks. All right, well, I just finished painting with my new Graco, and I gotta say, I really like it. Now, it did leave some drops that flung out of the tip, and so what I've found is that if I just start my spray down, or at least not above my project, then any of those that come out will land on the floor, and then I go up from there. All in all, I liked it. Now, it has different nuances or eccentricities. It sprays more paint. I used about half a gallon here, where previously I used about a quarter of a gallon. Now, I was thinning my paint previously with the Wagner because it simply wouldn't spray without it being thinned. This sucker sprays it without it being thinned, but that also means I go through more paint and there's more paint deposited on the floor and the wall. I will assess all these after I'm done to see if maybe thinning the paint would be a better idea. But I will say that there was a lot on the floor and I slipped and almost fell. There was so much there, and with the Wagner that didn't happen. All right, let's look at the first one. So right here I had a drop and I dabbed it with a towel, and there too, and it never filled in. So this paint is self-leveling, but it didn't really have gravity on its side because it was hanging like so. So any gravity would pull it this way. And there's a fleck of dust, I think. There's a pinhole, and that would have been a little hole in the wood. The texture is a little bit bumpy here. It's not quite glass, but I was intending to do another coat anyways. And this looks pretty good all in all. I would say this first one looks better than the last one. I want to show you how important technique is. Now, I've said, and I didn't invent this, but 90% of the quality of your paint job is due to your preparation. And I have learned that time and time again. Now, you think that leaves 10% for the rest, for the type of paint, the application of the paint, and you think 10% is not all that much, but it really is. And if you take a look here at this door that I finished, this is one coat of the paint that I've sprayed on with my new paint sprayer. And I did really well around the edges, the bottom, and the front surface, but at the top, for some reason, my technique caused me to put way too much paint in that area. I'm trying to remember how I did it, and I have video I could go back and look, so I could probably see my mistakes there, which I will do, go back and review. That's one of the reasons why I started doing this, just so I could have a record for myself to see what I did right, what I did wrong, because your memory gets a little bit faded after 4, 5, 6 days about exactly how my technique was and why there's too much paint at the top. But you can see the runs. Those are pretty obvious that there's too much paint, so those need to be sanded down. And then these little dots, it's like, I think the paint was probably a little bit foamy. Don't quite know why that would be. I don't recall seeing it at the time, but what these dots look like is that they were bubbles that popped and then it dried. A lot can be learned by looking at your technique. But it's taken about a half an hour to prep these for the next coat. I just want to take a minute to brag. I've been sharing all my mistakes and errors with you. And now I'm looking at a door that is in pretty darn good condition. This is still its first paint job with my new paint sprayer, and it's not perfect. There's a little blemish right there. This is something I don't like, but probably just going to have to live with. That too, another coat of paint will make it look better. It has some of the bubbles here up at the top, but it's really quite smooth.
This is my sanding process. I start off with my big electric sander. Then I use the small tool to get the finer details. And then, of course, I suck up all the dust with my vacuum cleaner. And it's ready to paint. All right, I've painted my
doors and drawer fronts for a second time with my Graco airless sprayer, and it went a lot better the second time. Still not perfect. There's still a learning curve that I haven't quite conquered yet, but it's a much better job. And the main reason is because I bought a smaller tip. Now the tip that came with the sprayer is a 515, and the tip looks like this. It has this arrow pointing which way the sprayer will flow, and I know you can't really see that very well, but it's just a little hole that's actually kind of horizontal. It starts as a round hole and then comes out like a fan. And what the 515 means is, the 15 means the orifice is a 0.015 inch. And the first 5, so the 5 of the 515 is half the size of the width of the fan. So that 5 means that the fan width will be 10 inches wide. So a fan will spray out in a width pattern like this rather than a circle. That means you get better coverage and you don't get too much in the middle. So it's roughly even paint from side to side. Now, the 0.015 is the largest my sprayer can handle. So what I did was I bought two smaller tips, a 413 and a 311. So the 413 means that the fan width is 8 inches, and the 13 means that the orifice size is 0.013 of an inch. And then the 311 is a 6-inch wide with a 0.011 inch diameter of the orifice. That's the one I used. I used the 311, and that one worked a lot better. Hi guys. Well, I did it. I'm done painting. I finally finished painting my kitchen cabinet doors and drawer fronts. Wow. But I'm happy. I'm very happy. It took me 4 tries with my Graco paint sprayer to get every one of them perfect. The spray, I'm talking about my technique. So it took me 3 tries of being really purposeful and you know, paying a lot of attention to do a good spray job. Now here's one thing I did. When I first started, I of course watched the tutorials on how to get good quality from the sprayer. I looked at it, I looked at some more videos again after my 3rd spray because I was still getting drips on it. So it really helped to watch these techniques and be reinforced. So the main problem I had was I did not have the pressure up high enough. The second problem I had was I was too close to the door when I started the sprayer. So do not aim at the thing you want to paint while you pull the trigger. You have to aim to the side and then come over it. So in other words, pull the trigger, move over your thing that you're painting, and then release the trigger after you're off it again. So that's the way I did it, and it looks beautiful. You can see right here, this is one of my doors, and it's smooth and shiny. So as I went through around the next day to inspect and see if there's any drips or any places I missed or like thin areas, I was extremely excited to see that there was none, 0. But there was a door that I totally missed. I totally missed it. So what I did with this one here is I went over it with a brush first to apply the paint, and then a roller to smooth it out, and set it here horizontally and let it settle down. And it looks pretty good. You can see the texture, which is surprisingly similar to the texture on the boxes, the cabinets themselves in the kitchen when I was using my Wagner sprayer. And it's okay because it kind of hides some of the blemishes or the imperfections in the wood. It's also still going to be easy to clean. And these, you can see any kind of imperfection. I mean, it's a really nice smooth paint job. But we'll see over time which texture I like best. Now this one, I'm gonna sand down a little bit, smooth it out, and I will put another, if it needs it, but it probably will, I'll put another coat of paint over it because I'm gonna go through and paint all of our interior doors of the house while that I have all this set up. All right, the next challenge is to put on all the pulls in the exact right spot, which, you know, to think about doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but if they're off, when you have two doors next to each other, like this one will be, there'll be another one right here. If the handles are off by even 1/4 of an inch, you'll notice. If they're crooked, even 1/8 of an inch, you'll know. I have this nifty little jig that I actually bought it, but I put tape on it because it has raised ridges and it was leaving dents in my new paint. Can't have that. So all I do is find the side I need to do. So this side, because this is where the hinges go, and this is the opposite of where the handle will be. So I'm going to put the handle right there. And then all I do is drill the hole there, and there's another one there. And I have this drill block I use so I cannot get crooked. So it's really easy to have the drill at a slight angle, and when you go to screw it in, it looks straight, but then when you have something like this, you'll really notice if the angle is not perfectly straight. Stick my screws through. All I need to do now is put the handle up against the screws, holes, and in they go. The hinges are even easier because I don't have to drill. A little bit stiff from the paint, but it's okay. They were tight to begin with. Now you want to make sure these are square, 90-degree angle, and aim it a little bit sideways to straighten it out. Oh! Shit. That's not supposed to happen. Didn't happen before. Why did that happen? Look at that. Can you see that? So I have a crack here. It goes all the way to about there. So this is my repair job to keep it from separating, because the crack goes all the way to there on this side. Now it's in the same place here. You can see it wasn't the screw that caused the crack. It was this trying to separate. And the reason is because there was a little bit of paint right here. I mean, this all had paint in it, but this had like a gathering of paint. And it snapped in just fine, but when I went to screw it down, for some reason it spread. So I put these on. I'm going to fill that with something. I want to use an adhesive.
I put wood glue in the crack and then I just sanded the top of it here. So what I'm going to do now is fill that crevice with paint and keep doing it until it's all filled up and level.
Welp, what I learned in this project. Well, it was vast. I shared with you along the way, but I would like to kind of give a real brief summary of some of the other things that I learned during this project. First of all, I would say dust control. The garage got really dusty towards the end. I did really early on got that vortex thing for my shop vac, which helped a lot. So I vacuumed a lot. However, when it came to blowing with the air compressor, it was a superior method of removing the dust from what I was working on, far better than or wiping. Especially if I'm wearing a mask, I'm not going to be blowing it with my mouth. So that worked really well, but it blew all of that dust into the air. And that got past my plastic sheeting and got all over everything. So I would have a better filtration system, or maybe do it outside, and I couldn't because of the weather. But if that was an option, that would be a better way to do it. I also had a lot of dust caused by the Wagner, because what it does is it atomizes the paint and it dries in the air and lingers around like a cloud, and it eventually will settle. So now there's this white dust all over everything, and it adheres a little bit to things. It won't simply come off with a vacuum cleaner or an air hose. I have to wipe everything off. So every single thing in the garage was covered with dust. I've since cleaned most of it. The rest of it's going to be cleaned as I pull things out and use it, but everything is going to need a wipe down. So think about your dust control situation and do what you can to seal off the area you're in. I had the strings about a foot below the ceiling so dust could get over that and settle on the other things. It was absolutely less, but think about your dust, and if you're going to be fine with it, then that's fine. But if you want to have a clean garage afterwards, consider going into it, how you do it. Another thing I didn't make clear in the videos was I sanded in between every 1 or 2 coats of everything I applied. I did find that there wasn't really a difference in sanding in any way, sanding 2 coats versus 1. So what I found works really well is put on a coat of whatever, and this could be primer or paint or one of the number of grain fillers that I used. Let that dry, put another coat on, let that dry, and then sand it. Now I used, how many grain fillers did I use? I used primer, I used Aqua Coat, I used polyvinyl alcohol, I used wood putty, I used plastic wood putty, I used shrink-free spackling, I used thinned epoxy and thickened epoxy, and I used drywall mud. What worked the best was paint. And that's what I'm going to do from now on, is paint. And in some areas, I even just went in with a little brush. I didn't need to put it on with a big brush. I just had some small areas. So I like little dots here and there, tiny little, like a fingernail painting brush. I used one that size. I definitely recommend avoiding sanding primer because it just doesn't sand well. It takes time, it uses way too many sand discs, and it doesn't do a very good job at all. So you do need to prime, but doing it all over again, I think I would spray a coat of primer and then put on a couple of coats, maybe even with a brush, of paint, sand that, and then fill the grain individually with paint wherever it needs it most. Do a couple of coats on there, sand, and smooth and sand. I didn't find any of those grain fillers to be worth much of anything. Oh, there's this stuff called sanding sealer that I did not use. I read about it after the fact, but that would have been a good thing to use after I used the paint stripper. What it's supposed to do is dry the wood so it can be sanded smooth, and also seal it so the primer, paint, whatever, doesn't soak into the wood as much. And that's really the problem I was having, is the pores were soaking up whatever I tried to fill it with. It seemed to be never ending. I mean, it was ending because we have this cabinet door here that you can't see the wood grain. So obviously it was ending, but it, at the time when you get on your 4th, 5th, 6th application of something and it's, you're still seeing it soak in and leave the crevices, it's kind of disheartening. There were a lot of disheartening moments in this video that I did not share with you. If I had shown you, chronologically of how I did it, there was a lot of back and forth. There's sand, fill, paint, and then sand, fill, paint, sand, fill, paint. I had to go back and forth and do that over and over and over again. So there really wasn't a chronology that you would want to watch. It was rather confusing. So that's why I had to edit this video in a different way, just to show you the steps that needed to be done. And even if you have to go back to 1, 2, and then 3, and then back to 1, 2, and 3, you still know what the steps are. So I did really well with my patience and attention to detail and just doing what it took to get a good job. And I was not going to let my eagerness to finish disrupt that. I did a great job throughout the entire thing until I declared, I'm finished painting. Now, I gave that conditional painting because I didn't want my mind to think, oh, I'm finished. But it still kind of hurt it that way, and I made some pretty bad mistakes at the end. And I drilled some holes in the wrong places. You know I'm big on systems and patterns and routines and processes, and I've been sharing them with you all along, and I've been using them all along, and that's always my process when I do something, is find a process. And towards the very end, when I was drilling the holes for the cabinet pulls, I just at one point I dropped my process and I accidentally put the holes up there. I don't think it was this one, but actually it may have been. I put them up there on the wrong side. They need to be on the bottom. Another time I drilled a hole there and there, as if it was a short handle. And then there was a couple times, because of the flexibility of that little plastic template thing I was using to drill the holes, that this hole was over a 32nd of an inch. And when they were right next to each other, like these two are, you could tell. I apologize I didn't take a picture of it, because it was one of those things where you look at it, you go like, I don't know, I'm not quite sure. But anyways, that was all because of my mentality of feeling like I was done, and all I needed to do was slap on the handles and throw them in the kitchen. And that was absolutely not the case. So I caution you to avoid that Mount Everest mentality. You are not done until you are done. Another issue I have after the fact, everything looks great. I'm super, super happy with it. I'm ecstatically happy that I'm happy with it, and my wife's happy with it. So that is great. It turned out great. I'm glad I did this project. It was a great learning experience for me. If I were to do it again, I could do it in half the time, just from what I've learned on this one. And I really, really hope that this video helps you save some time as well. I've made a lot of mistakes for you, so you don't have to. Oh, and the other thing that made me take a long time, I mean, this probably delayed me by a month, is that new paint sprayer. I was mastered at the Wagner. I had it all of its quirks figured out. I could spray it and get a good paint job. Towards the end, it was spattering every time, and I wasn't sure why. It seemed like maybe the nozzle was maybe it kind of worn a little bit and it didn't give a good seal. The paint was too thick. I don't really know what it was, but I wasn't having consistent good work. That's why I bought the Graco, which worked fine, but I needed a lot of training, and it took me 3 tries of painting all of these cabinets and sanding them back down again before my 4th try was real good. And the biggest thing I had was I kept applying too much paint. Even when I went over it once, I look at it and it looks good. I might have seen like maybe an area that was a little bit too thin, and so I'll fix that now. Well, then I put on too much and it ran. So do everything you can to resist the urge to spray more. The 4th time I literally had to slap my own hand because I saw an area that looked a little thin and I was going to go back over it. And then I said no, because that was the one thing I told myself before I did. I said, no matter what, do not go over the same area twice. If I needed to do a whole new paint job, that would be better after it dries, but not to go psh, psh. That's why it ran. And guess what? It turned out looking great. So listen to me. It worked. I said that to myself on all of those first 3, but I didn't listen to myself very well. Oh, and join me for the next part when I show you how I installed the sliders, the no slam sliders on our drawers. It's not as easy as you might think. Okay, so there you have it. That is everything I learned on this project, plus everything you've heard me say before. So I hope this has helped you. I really hope this saves you some time. And if it does, please leave a comment and tell me that it did, because that's the main reason why I'm putting these out is to help you. And if I'm helping you, I'd sure like to know.